Nobody's really happy with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm sure there's a lot of flailing and like trying to pretend that this game is some major success story, that it's like some major deal or whatever. But the reality of the situation is that Rebirth is a major step down from Remake, right? The sales are lower, the critical acclaim is lower, and I think most importantly, like the blind fanboy shills aren't able to address like the very real problems with Final Fantasy VII R Rebirth anymore, right? Like people like to say, like with remake, that like, oh, it was an old game and it's just been modernized. They added in new characters, they changed the plot, they changed the gameplay to pull in a new audience. They did all of this for you, the fans. Yeah, and every step of the way, like fans were saying that like this looks bad, this is wrong, this isn't in canon, right? Like people were addressing the fact that like the people who made Final Fantasy VII great are not with Square Enix any longer. And now they have like a bunch of their fraud replacements coming in and just ruining the integrity of the work, right? They're not able to make a Final Fantasy VII remake, right? When you look at like what Shinji Mikami was able to do with like the Resident Evil 1 remake on GameCube and see like what a huge evolution that was over the PS1 version, right? When he had like more powerful Nintendo hardware to work with compared to like the relatively weak, insipid, like inconsequential PS1 hardware, like you see like the artistry there. You see the minor improvements, the tweaks, like the adherence to what made the original like appealing to people, right? Like you have like respect for the source material. With Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, there's none of that, right? All anybody seems to be doing is just showing you everything you recognize. Oh man, they're in Cosmo Canyon. Oh, they're in Costa del Sol. They're here. Like, oh man, look at this location. Oh, look at those. Listen to those Nobio and Amatsu tracks. Oh, remember like Red and how he's like faking his voice. Like remember that English players when that wasn't really a thing. Like, like remember that. Like you have all of these people like just trying to sell you on this idea that like, oh, Rebirth, it's a great JRPG. But it couldn't be more obvious to me that like the audience is moving away from this style of JRPG. When I look at like what the community is doing, like they're playing like Trails games, they're playing like Yeast, they're playing like Xenoblade or Fire Emblem or Persona or whatever. Like nobody except like 40-year-old boomers care about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, right? Especially after that asinine remake, right? Like everything I'm hearing from people who actually played it is that like the game is padded, it's boring, it's dull, it's derivative, it's the same thing we've seen before. And what's more, I think being a sequel to a game that didn't need to have a sequel to begin with, like you're having a very severe drop off problem, right? Where people do not want to put like 40 hours into a JRPG, 40, 50, 70, 100 hours into a JRPG, and then be told, okay, like the plot doesn't resolve here, like be sure to come back in 4 years for the next game, right? Like it's just so padded. It's so lazy, right? Like I can't imagine anybody would actually put up with that. Like looking back, when I put like 100 hours into like Final Fantasy X or or 6 or like Batten Kaitos Origins or any one of those games, like they had reasons to keep me coming back. They had engaging plots, they had great characters, they had like all this hidden content, and they actually had endings. They actually had conclusions. They actually like gave you like a real finale to like all your hard work. They gave you something great if you stuck with it to the very end, right? You got an absolute banger if you got to the end of Final Fantasy 6 or 7 or 10. Well, not so much 10. 10's ending is kind of crap. But like you know what I mean, right? Like there were reasons to keep you invested in these games, right? With 7, like what reason is there Like the only time I ever saw people excited about this game, right? And this is the reason I kept bringing this up so much in like the launch window period, were like Tifa's giant milkers, right? Like those huge jiggling things. Like like people thought I was obsessed with them when I kept bringing it up, but like the reality of the situation was that that was all anybody else cared about. That was like the center of Square Enix's marketing campaign is like, look at this. We have Tifa and look at this. Like she's showing a lot of boob in this one scene. Like everything I've heard from fans who have actually played the game have told me that like she's actually covered up 90% of the time. So it's like okay, whatever. But like again, like the fact that they had to resort to such like a cheap tactic to try and like fan bait people into thinking this game was going to be like some amazing thing when in reality it was just like always going to be mid, right? Like seeing how cringy like the situations are, like Yuffie like being scared of going to a mine cart or getting a chocobo with like a Cloud haircut and calling it Cloud Junior, right? Like seeing Red 13 act like a kid and like still pretend to be cool. It's like yeah, this does not work. Okay, like it's just not working in a remake, right? And they didn't really think about how this stuff would look in like live action or like in the modern technology, right? Like they didn't think about this, right? It's just kind of remarkable how the game just completely fails at really doing much of anything in regards to like its character growth or the plot progression. Like, you're going from Midgar to like Eris's death, I believe, in this game. I don't know, like, what major changes they did, and like, I think we have confirmation now that the next one is going to be the last part. But like, that's exactly my point. Is that like we shouldn't have had a part. Like, we shouldn't have had parts. Okay, like Final Fantasy VII was not that long. It's like what, like a 30-hour RPG. Like, it's I'd say it has significantly less content than six, from my recollection, right? Um, well, last time I used it, I played a guide. I used a guide for some of the weirder stuff, but like, you know what I mean, right? When you play Final Fantasy VII and like you just have these situations where you just go like, okay, yeah, like the game shouldn't have been that hard to remake. And I've said this before, like, and I think a lot of people are agreeing with me. Like, the time to put out this remake should have been in the PS3 era. Like it should have been like an early PS3 game. Like okay, we're gonna work on like Final Fantasy 13 or whatever, but we're gonna remake 7 because like first of all, it's an all-time classic game. People love it. People still remember it really fondly. People want to see like it remade in like the modern technology because it hasn't dated well. Okay, we're gonna put it out on PS3 and make it so that like modern audiences can enjoy it too, right? And I think that's the thing that like Final Fantasy VII has really failed at doing, right? Um, I think all modern franchises have failed at doing this, but like I think especially Final Fantasy is that like they haven't done anything to bring new people in, right? Like everything they're doing is just like, oh yeah, remember Tifa? Remember Eris? Remember Yuffie? Oh man, don't you remember how hot they all were when you were like 10? And like completely like refusing to acknowledge that like, the guys who grew up playing Final Fantasy VII are like in their 40s now with families. And so like throwing like titties in their face isn't going to like be that big of a sell for them, right? Like that was kind of something that like they just they just didn't consider when doing that like the Tifa titty like shield campaign, which was a shield campaign by the way. Like they didn't think about that. Was that their target audience is so old now that they wouldn't be interested in like underage girls showing boobs in their face. I'm sorry, only Yuffie is underage, but you know what I mean, right? Like like it just doesn't work for this audience. Like what people remember fondly about the game is like the characters and the story and like the impactful moments and what do they focus on? Like in the promotional material, oh titties, like come on, like you should have been able to do better than this. You should have been able to make a proper remake to a genuinely good game, and you failed to do it. And like I'm not even touching like other topics right now. Like I think a big justification for the game not doing well right now is that it's like PlayStation 5 exclusive. Well, what else would you put it on? Right? It's not going to do well on PC. It's not going to do well on Switch. Like if this thing released next to like the Xenoblade like a Monolith Soft game, it would get like wrecked. Okay, like it would not be able to compete with Nintendo's RPGs right now. Is kind of my mindset on this. Like that stuff is way more popular than Final Fantasy is right now, and right now I think we're starting to see that like the actual people who matter, the people who like actually buy and play these games, are starting to understand that and are going to where the JRPGs are, the Nintendo Switch.